So now let's tie this into Laserfiche and talk a little bit about process design and some best practices to keep in mind when building a process that you can report on. Some of you may already be using forms in some capacity, but for those of you that are new to it, let's lay the foundation as to what it is and how it can be used. Laserfiche Forms is our electronic forms tool that helps organizations digitize and automate business processes and workflows. Forms allows you to capture information in a process digitally upfront and create workflows behind them to facilitate information routing, review and approvals, document creation, escalations, and much more. It also serves as a task management tool that can assign tasks to teams or specific individuals, allow you to keep track of each step in a process and any priorities and due dates. And last but definitely not least, Forms also provides reporting and analytics tools out of the box, and even allows you to build custom reports on your process. So let's dive a little deeper into these different reports available in the product. So out of the box, Laserfiche provides 6 different reports on your process. At a high level, let's go through each one here in front of us. Starting at the top left, performance reports. These include dashboards that allow you to keep track of how long processes take to complete. For example, you can view a scatter plot of when instances were completed, a bar chart showing how many instances were completed over a time range. Secondly, we have the work in progress reports, which allow users to view statistics about in progress instances, such as which stages of a process are possible bottlenecks. It also includes insightful reporting, such as forecasts of completion dates and how many in-progress instances to expect in the future. Third, we have task loads, which are operational reports that show how many tasks are currently assigned to specific users. You can view a color-coded heat map of which user tasks in a process are accumulating the most tasks and use that information to determine if tasks need to be reallocated or which individuals are capable of taking on more new tasks. Forms reports allow you to visualize data about the values your users entered for each field in a form, or even view individual form submissions. Workload reports allow organizations to view which users or teams have the most in progress or complete tasks. And finally, irregularity report shows process administrators or business analysts which tasks from a process have been suspended or terminated, the number of times that's occurred. So if there are issues with your former process, you can learn more about them here and get a head start on your troubleshooting. Beyond these out-of-the-box reports, Laserfiche also supports your ability to create custom reports from any of the process data or information collected on the forms. When designing a custom report, you can specify which values and filters to use, as well as how you want to present that data in a way that makes most sense to the end user, whether that be a pie chart, column bar, table, line graph. On the right, we see an example of a custom report that was created for an HR recruiting process. This custom report specifically tells us how many candidates are in consideration for each role. We did this by pulling the position in which they applied for on the form submissions, and then took the status of the process being in progress. Using this custom report, we can even drill down to see the specific details of the individuals that applied for the role and view all the information they submitted with that form. All right, so now that we have a little background on the reporting tools available, let's talk about some of the things that you should consider when designing a process to optimize your ability to create impactful reports that can help keep our processes running at a high level. The first topic is about forms design. It's important to design the form that kicks off the process in a way that's not only intuitive to the submitter, but also collects pertinent data that can be reported on. When talking with the people involved with the process, define the data required to complete each task throughout the process. And once you have a firm understanding of this, you can then begin to design that form. For those of you that may not be aware, Laserfiche forms are designed with a user-friendly drag-and-drop experience where you can select from a variety of pre-configured fields such as checkboxes, radio buttons, drop-downs, address fields, date and time fields, upload fields, and much more. You can even create sections or break the form into different pages, add your company branding and themes. What is great about the Forms Designer is that it doesn't require experience in coding. However, it is important to note for the more technical folks that you do have the ability to add CSS and JavaScript in the form for any further customization required. So 2 things that we want to focus on when contemplating forms design is standardizing data entry and making sure that data that we collect is in a manner that allows us to create reports that our end users have requested in requirements gathering. It is important to make sure that we're collecting all the necessary information in common and standardized formats for reliable reporting. When designing our electronic forms for data capture, we need to keep data entry in mind and find ways to reduce and eliminate any inconsistencies that can potentially enter our databases. So let's talk about several ways that you can do so using Laserfiche forms. First off, be specific with the questions that you ask. So instead of providing an open-ended question where a response can be up to interpretation, you should dive deeper, create a series of questions that can be more easily responded to one by one. By doing so, we can make sure that all of the relevant information is collected with the initial submission, and in turn, all of the specific data points can be used to create meaningful reports that will lead to more insights for the business. Secondly, provide your form submitters with pre-configured options when appropriate in the form. So you could use, like we mentioned a moment ago, checkboxes or drop-downs and radio buttons. And with these field types, you can force users to select their answer from a specific pre-populated list. This ensures that the data is collected in that standardized format and really helps with aggregate reporting on the data, since it simplifies grouping of responses to display in graphs and charts. Secondly, make certain fields required. In forms, you could also mark certain fields in a form as required. Requiring someone to answer specific questions before submitting the form will again ensure all of the necessary data is submitted to keep the process moving and also makes your reports more accurate and complete. The more data that we have for reporting purposes, the more analysis we can do to promote process improvement. Another important thing is applying field constraints. So in order to help standardize data from text or number fields, you can apply what we call field constraints, which formats the information input into a given field for the submitter. For example, you have users type their phone number into a field, which automatically puts it in the following format: parentheses, 3 digits, 3 digits, dash 4 digits. This will eliminate different types of phone number entries and formatting, and simplifies reporting on the data collected from that field. And lastly, take advantage of database lookups. Laserfiche Forms allows you to pull information straight from a database to populate fields on the form. Adding database lookups into forms will help with standardizing data because you'll eliminate manual data entry and discrepancies that come with it. An example would be having an employee first providing their ID number, which would automatically populate all their identifying information such as their first name, last name, department, phone number. So with these points in mind, make sure your data is useful and stay on top of the accuracy of the reports that you are leveraging. Nothing kills a report quicker than inaccurate data, so data cleansing is very important. You need to stay vigilant in order to make sure everything is kept clean. Simply make sure you look at your various reports occasionally to see if any data looks incomplete, inaccurate, or irrelevant, and adjust the form or process or report as needed. Another thing to keep in mind in forms design is managing what we call your variables. Variables are what allow you to store your field and process information and use them throughout a process or when creating reports. So every time you create a field in Forms, a variable is created by default with the field name. To stay organized, edit these variables when necessary so that you know exactly which ones to easily reference when adding values and filters to a custom report. Next, I do want to very briefly talk about designing the process and one best practice to use to ensure quality operational reports. For those of you that are not familiar with Forms again, the workflow and automation that you build behind a form is all done in what we call the process designer. The process designer allows users to create BPMN compliant process models using drag and drop interaction, similar to the Forms designer that we covered. You have pre-configured activities to choose from on the left and drag it into the center canvas for configuration. These activities include routing forms to users or teams for review and approval, sending email notifications and escalations, saving forms along with their attachments into our repositories, and much more. So when designing the process, one thing that you want to keep in mind in the process designer are the lanes that you can use to define the different stages of a process. So as we mentioned earlier, it's important to gather this information in the discovery phase and establish these stages when diagramming the business process. How you organize these different stages of the process will directly impact the operational and performance reports that your process owners and managers will be reviewing later on. So now that we've learned how to design a process with reporting in mind, let's apply some of what we discussed and think about building a process in Laserfiche such as a travel request approval. The travel request process is fairly straightforward and standard across the board. When you want to travel on business, you submit a request to your manager, and the request is either approved or denied. As we can see in the diagram on the right-hand side, the process starts with a form submission. The manager then reviews that request, makes an approval decision, and once that decision is made, an email is sent to the employee with that information. Let's first talk about forms design. So take a look at the form on the screen and think about some of the areas where this form example may be lacking. The obvious is that it only includes two fields, a name field and a comment box asking for the submitted to provide all of the travel details. This form does not ensure that all the data necessary for an approval is captured in the initial submission. A form like this one may require you to go back and forth with the submitter until you can truly understand the request and make a decision on it. Additionally, what if you wanted to report on this information? We don't know what department the employee is in. We cannot report on trips during a specific time period without having date fields. We can't report on any travel type. We can't report on the destination, and the list goes on. So now let's look at a second example of this form that actually takes reporting in mind. This here is a much better way to handle the initial submission for the travel request process. Instead of having one free response question, this form captures all the different information that we need and may want to report on by requiring the submitter to submit specific information within separate fields for each data point. So drop-down fields, radio buttons, and checkbox fields, again, as we can see here, can force users to select their answer from a specific list. So this helps with aggregate reporting since it does simplify that grouping of responses to display in graphs or charts. We also have a field for the name in case we wanted to run a report on every travel request process for the specific employee. We have a drop-down for the employee to choose their specific department. So if we wanted to report on travel expense costs per department. We have separate fields for the departure data and departure date and return date. So we can report on trip duration and maybe costs for travel in specific quarters or months of the year. We have a drop-down for the travel type. So we can run reports on travel types for specific departments. And maybe this is connected to an expense report submission where we can take costs into account when budgeting for each category next year. Even with adding all these other fields to the form, we also still provide a comments box to the submitter to add any additional information or commentary for the reviewer on top of all the pertinent information that's already been collected. Some of the information that's useful in reporting might not only be collected in the initial travel request submission, but can also be collected by other individuals that are involved in the process in the other steps. So for an example, let's think of the simple approval step. By adding comment box in review steps, approvers can add context and necessary information as they approve or reject. When they try to develop insightful reporting from this data will really make a difference. Remember to think about what matters both to each of your personas and build that data into that process. Don't be afraid to get more granular when you need to. If you're concerned with how people are spending money, then record it. So we can extend the original travel request process and add a step for booking travel, or even add an expense form so employees can upload their expenses by line item when they return from a trip. This way, managers can review the items being expensed from that given trip and capture all of the data from that initial request to the point of the expense reimbursement. This will allow you to create comprehensive reports that incorporate all data from the entire trip throughout the whole process. Looking at this process diagram, we made sure that we divided the process into different stages in order to, again, help with creating operational reports. We renamed the stages appropriately and organized the user tasks within their respective swim lanes. By doing so, forms will be able to provide detailed breakdowns on each stage of that process. So now you can see how long it takes for the manager to approve travel on average, or as opposed to how long it takes to book it once it's approved. So now that our form is designed and our process is split into stages and designed, let's see what type of reports we can create with this data. End users will be able to easily see the status of their travel request, as well as their upcoming and past trips and the type of trips they are taking. Managers can see how much is being spent on the different types of travel. They can also see how often employees are traveling. And importantly, as we talked about earlier, they can also take a look at process health, see how efficient the overall process is running, how long it's taking certain stages of the process to complete, who's assigned the most tasks, so on and so forth. And executives can use these reports to view overall expenditures and trends regarding travel at the company. So as you can see, we're able to create reports that satisfy every persona in this process. And so lastly, just want to kind of show you some examples of some reports that were created for this specific process here. So here is an example of an aggregate report generated from this travel request process that shows the count of travel types requested by employees. So with this report, we can see that the most frequently requested type of travel is for trade shows, followed by conferences and training. Here is an example of an operational report for this travel request process that shows the percentage of time being spent as a whole between the travel request stage and booking travel. As we can see in this visual, travel request took longer than booking travel in this scenario. And below is an example of an aggregate report in the form of a bar graph showing the amount of money spent by each department. We can see that the development department has spent the most money on travel related to training since the beginning of the year. So this may be useful for an executive to predict future trends and budgeting for the next year. So those are a few examples that I wanted to share and kind of wanted to talk about the travel request process and how we can apply some of the different concepts that we talked about today. That concludes the presentation that I have for you. In order to help you get started with automating business processes with reporting in mind, we have a couple resources that you may find useful. The first is a comprehensive ebook, business process you can report on. And the second is a worksheet that will help walk you through automating a process. So you can answer some of the questions that we have here so that they can really get you thinking about your process and how you can transform it.